I used to think betrayal had limits until I saw my sister smile while my husband pushed me, just to see if I was lying about the life growing inside me. The wooden stairs beneath my feet disappeared in an instant, and as I tumbled down, gasping for air that wouldn't come, I heard her laugh soft, satisfied, cruel. But what if the worst part wasn't the fall, wasn't even losing the baby I'd prayed for through 3 years of trying? What if the worst part was realizing, as I lay there bleeding, that they'd been planning this all along? My name is Claire Hartley, and I should have known something was wrong the morning I found the recording device in my purse. The Arkansas River winds through our little town of Riverside, Colorado, like a silver thread stitching together Main Street's weathered storefronts and the modest homes that climb up the foothills. From my office window at Summit Ledger, I can see the water catching the late afternoon sun, but today, even that familiar comfort couldn't ease the knot growing in my stomach. I'd been working as a senior accountant at the small financial firm for 6 years, long enough to know every client's quirks and every colleague's coffee order, long enough to build a life that felt solid, predictable, safe. Nathan and I had bought our house 3 blocks from downtown 2 years after we married, a blue Victorian with white trim and a front porch where we'd planned to watch our children play someday. That someday had felt impossibly far away until 3 weeks ago. I stared at the pregnancy test hidden in my desk drawer, the pink lines still as vivid as they'd been that Tuesday morning when I'd taken it in the office bathroom. Positive. After 3 years of trying, after the devastating miscarriage at 8 weeks last spring, after countless negative tests that left me hollow and desperate finally. Positive. But I hadn't told Nathan yet. The rational part of me insisted I was being cautious, responsible even. After losing our first pregnancy, I wanted to be absolutely certain before raising our hopes again. I'd scheduled an appointment with Dr. Martinez for next week, planned to surprise Nathan with the ultrasound photo if everything looked good. The rational part of me was lying. The truth was more unsettling. A whisper that had been growing louder each day, Nathan already knew. It started with small things. The way he'd glance at my coffee cup when I reached for my second cup and say, "Caffeine isn't great for certain conditions, right?" The knowing look in his eyes when I complained about feeling nauseous after dinner. The way he'd taken to watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then there was the recording device. I'd found it yesterday morning while searching for my lip balm, a small black rectangle no bigger than a flash drive tucked beneath my wallet. At first, I'd thought it was some kind of promotional USB from a client, but when I examined it closer, I saw the tiny microphone, the blinking red light that meant it was actively recording. My hands had shaken as I turned it over, looking for any identifying marks. Nothing. Just smooth black plastic and that damning red light. I'd slipped it back into my purse. Mind racing. Who would put a recording device in my personal belongings, and why Nathan's face had flashed through my mind immediately, followed by a surge of guilt. My husband of 5 years, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, who held me while I cried after the miscarriage, who'd painted our spare bedroom yellow because we'd both dreamed it would be a nursery someday. Nathan wouldn't spy on me. Would he? "Claire, you okay?" My colleague Janet's voice startled me back to the present. She stood in my office doorway, concern creasing her weathered face. "You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 20 minutes without typing anything." I forced a smile. "Just a headache. Long day. Well, it's past 6. Why don't you head home? That husband of yours is probably wondering where you are." Nathan. I glanced at my phone and saw 3 missed calls from him, all within the last hour. My stomach clenched. "You're right. I should go." The drive home usually took 15 minutes, but I found myself taking the long way, winding through the newer developments on the east side of town. I needed time to think, to figure out how to confront Nathan about the recording device without sounding paranoid, but as I pulled into our driveway, I saw Nathan's silhouette in the living room window, and my courage evaporated. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly. Even from the car, I could see the tension in his shoulders. I sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching my husband through the warm glow of our front window. 5 years ago, that sight would have filled me with contentment. Coming home to Nathan had always felt like stepping into a warm embrace. Now it felt like walking into a trap. The recording device seemed to burn against my hip where it sat in my purse. I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my desk drawer, about the secret growing inside me that might not be secret at all, about the way Nathan had been watching me lately, as if he was waiting for something, as if he was testing me. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Whatever was happening, whatever Nathan suspected or knew, I couldn't avoid it forever. But as I walked up our front steps, I made a decision I wouldn't mention the pregnancy yet, not until I understood what was really going on. Not until I figured out who I could trust. The front door opened before I could reach for my keys. Nathan stood there, his smile too bright, his eyes too intense. "There you are," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a cage. I was starting to worry. The family dinner at Nathan's parents' house was supposed to be a monthly tradition, something we'd maintained religiously since our wedding. But as I stood in their oak-paneled dining room that Saturday evening, clutching a glass of sparkling water while everyone else nursed their wine, I felt like an actress who'd forgotten her lines. "Claire, honey, you look a little pale," Nathan's mother, Dorothy, observed from across the table. Her voice carried that particular brand of concern that wealthy women perfected, caring enough to comment, detached enough to avoid real involvement. "I'm fine, just tired from work," I replied, forcing another bite of her famous pot roast. The smell made my stomach turn, but I couldn't afford to draw attention to my suddenly sensitive nose. "You work too hard," boomed Nathan's father, Richard, gesturing with his wine glass. "That little accounting firm doesn't deserve the hours you put in." Nathan's hand found mine under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that once would have comforted me. Now his touch felt calculated, performative. "Actually," a familiar voice chimed in from the kitchen doorway, "I think Claire deserves something special tonight." My sister Melissa appeared, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift bag in soft pink tissue paper. She looked radiant as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile that same dazzling beam that had charmed everyone since we were children. At 29, she was 5 years younger than me but had always seemed more sophisticated, more put together. "Mel, you didn't need to bring anything," I said, though unease prickled along my spine. Melissa rarely gave gifts without occasion, and when she did, they usually came with barbs. "Oh, but I wanted to." She set the bag in front of me with theatrical flourish. "Just a little something for future little surprises." The emphasis on little surprises made my blood run cold. Around the table, Nathan's family watched with interest, waiting for me to open the mysterious gift. Nathan himself leaned back in his chair, wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. With trembling fingers, I pulled back the tissue paper. Inside was a collection of baby items, a tiny yellow onesie with Miracle Baby embroidered across the chest, a pair of impossibly small booties, and a pregnancy journal bound in pink leather. The table fell silent. "Melissa," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is this?" Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Just being optimistic. You and Nathan have been trying for so long, and, well..." She shrugged, her eyes dancing with something that looked dangerously close to malice. "A girl can hope." "Right." "That's very thoughtful," Dorothy said carefully, though her eyebrows had drawn together in confusion. I felt exposed, pinned like a butterfly under glass. How could Melissa know, even if she suspected? Why would she put me on the spot like this in front of Nathan's entire family? "Claire." Nathan's voice cut through my racing thoughts. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I started to respond, to deflect with some joke about Melissa's enthusiasm, when disaster struck. As I shifted in my chair, reaching for my purse to steady myself, The pregnancy test I'd been carrying like a talisman tumbled out onto the hardwood floor. It landed with a small plastic clatter that might as well have been thunder. Everyone stared at the white stick with its undeniable pink lines, lying there in the middle of Dorothy's pristine dining room like evidence of a crime. Well, Nathan said, his voice eerily calm. She's been carrying it for weeks. The casual cruelty in his tone hit me like a physical blow. Not joy, not surprise, not even anger, just cold, matter-of-fact observation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment, anticipating it. Weeks, Richard repeated, looking between Nathan and me with growing confusion. I scrambled to pick up the test, my face burning with humiliation. I was going to tell you all together, after I saw the doctor. Were you? Melissa's voice held a note of theatrical surprise. Or were you waiting to see if this one would stick? The words hung in the air like poison. Around the table, I could see the family trying to process what was happening, the undercurrents they couldn't quite grasp. Melissa, Dorothy said sharply, that's enough. But when I looked at my sister, really looked at her, I saw something that made my blood freeze. She wasn't embarrassed by her cruel comment. She wasn't sorry for ambushing me. She was pleased. More than pleased, she looked positively delighted by my humiliation. Her eyes sparkled with a satisfaction that was almost sensual, as if my pain was feeding something dark inside her. I think, Nathan said, standing slowly, Claire and I should head home. She's obviously exhausted. As I gathered the baby items back into the pink bag with shaking hands, I caught Melissa watching me. When our eyes met, she gave me the slightest smile, not the warm, supportive expression of a sister, but something cold and calculating, something that told me this ambush had been planned. The ride home passed in suffocating silence. Nathan drove with mechanical precision, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I clutched the gift bag in my lap, my mind reeling with questions I was afraid to ask. How had Melissa known to bring baby gifts? How had Nathan known I'd been carrying the pregnancy test? And why did I feel like I'd just walked into the first act of a play where everyone knew their lines except me as we pulled into our driveway? Nathan finally spoke. 3 weeks, he said quietly. You've known for 3 weeks and didn't tell me. It wasn't a question. Nathan, I can explain. Can you? He turned to face me, and in the dim light from our porch, his expression was unreadable. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were planning to keep this a secret. Just like last time. That's not true. I just wanted to be sure. Sure of what, Claire? Sure the baby would survive. Sure I'd react the way you wanted, or sure you could control the narrative. His words cut deep, but it was the coldness in his voice that terrified me. This wasn't the man I'd married, the man who'd held me through the darkest period of my life. This was a stranger. The next morning, Nathan left for work without his usual goodbye kiss, and I found myself alone in our house for the first time in days. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but watchful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I made coffee with trembling hands, my mind circling back to Melissa's knowing smile and Nathan's cold accusations. Something was deeply wrong, and I needed to understand what I was dealing with before it consumed me entirely. I started with my journal. I'd kept a diary since college, nothing dramatic or confessional, just daily observations and thoughts. It lived in my nightstand drawer, a leather-bound book Nathan had given me for our first anniversary. I pulled it out now, flipping back through recent entries, looking for anything that might explain how Melissa had known to bring those baby gifts. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 weeks ago, I'd written about taking the pregnancy test, about my fears and hopes. 2 weeks ago, I'd noted my increased fatigue and morning nausea. Last week, I'd even sketched out plans for telling Nathan, complete with ideas for a romantic dinner reveal. But scattered throughout my own handwriting were small pencil marks in the margins, tiny checks and underlines that definitely weren't mine. Someone had been reading my journal, marking the passages about the pregnancy. My hands shook as I flipped through more pages. The markings went back months, subtle annotations next to entries about our trying to conceive, about my doctor's appointments, about my fears following the miscarriage. Someone had been systematically documenting my most private thoughts. The pencil marks looked fresh. I thought of Melissa's visit last Tuesday, when she'd stopped by to borrow sugar while Nathan was at work. I'd left her alone in the living room for maybe 10 minutes while I took a shower. Our bedroom was directly above the living room. She could have easily slipped upstairs. "Oh, God," I whispered, sinking onto the bed. The recording device in my purse. The journal markings. Melissa's perfectly timed gift. Nathan's unsurprised reaction to the pregnancy test falling out. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They'd been watching me, listening to me, documenting my every move. But why I needed proof of what was happening, something more concrete than pencil marks and suspicious timing. I thought about Nathan's insistence on upgrading our home security system 6 months ago, his enthusiastic installation of cameras in every common area. "For safety," he'd said. "You never know who might be watching." The irony of that statement hit me like a slap. I found Nathan's laptop in his home office, password protected but not in a way I couldn't handle. We'd always shared passwords, another small intimacy of marriage that now felt like a vulnerability. His desktop was organized with military precision work folders, financial documents, and tucked in the corner, a folder labeled Home Security. My pulse hammered as I opened it. The security software was sophisticated, much more advanced than what Nathan had shown me. Multiple camera feeds, audio recordings, motion sensors. Our house was wired like a surveillance facility. But it was the saved files that made my blood run cold. Hours of footage, all focused on me. Me in the kitchen making coffee. Me in the living room reading. Me in our bedroom getting dressed. The timestamps went back months, and someone had been saving specific clips, cataloging my behavior with scientific precision. I clicked on a folder labeled Recent Activity and found footage from the dinner party at Nathan's parents' house. My heart stopped as I watched myself at the table, the camera angle perfectly positioned to capture the moment the pregnancy test fell from my purse, but the timestamp was wrong. According to the metadata, this footage was recorded 3 days before the dinner party ever happened. That was impossible. Unless... I opened another file, this one labeled Test Run. The footage showed me at Nathan's parents' dining room table, but this time I was alone with Nathan and Melissa. She was handing me the same pink gift bag, and I was reacting with the same shock and humiliation. But this version included audio. "Perfect." Nathan's voice came through the speakers. "But we need her more off balance. Can you time it so the test falls out naturally?" "Trust me," Melissa's voice replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her tone. "I know exactly how to make her look unstable." The file was dated 4 days before the family dinner. They had rehearsed it. They had planned my humiliation down to the smallest detail, choreographed my embarrassment like a stage production. The family dinner hadn't been a coincidence or even an ambush. It had been a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know my role. I sat back in Nathan's chair, my mind reeling. The surveillance, the rehearsals, the calculated cruelty. What was the end game? What could they possibly gain from making me look unstable or unreliable? A new file caught my eye. Insurance documentation. I opened it with growing dread and found a collection of documents I'd never seen before. Medical records that weren't mine. Psychiatric evaluations I'd never undergone. Financial assessments of our joint assets. And at the bottom, a draft insurance claim for accidental death due to mental instability. The claim was dated for next week. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a scream. They weren't just trying to humiliate me or make me look unstable. They were building a case, creating a paper trail that would support a very specific narrative, A narrative where I was mentally unfit, prone to delusions, likely to harm myself. A narrative that would explain away my death as suicide. I quickly saved everything to a USB drive, my fingers trembling as I copied file after file. Whatever they were planning, whatever twisted game they were playing, I needed evidence. I needed proof of their conspiracy before the front door slammed downstairs. "Claire," Nathan's voice called out. "I'm home early. We need to talk." I yanked the USB drive from the computer and shoved it into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. According to the clock, it was only 11:30 in the morning. Nathan never came home before 5 unless something was wrong. "Claire." His voice was closer now, on the stairs. I quickly closed the laptop and moved away from his desk, trying to look casual as Nathan appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes went immediately to the computer. "Wow, what are you doing in here?" he asked. "Looking for the checkbook." I lied. "I need to pay the electric bill." He stepped into the room, and I noticed he was blocking the doorway, not accidentally deliberately. "The checkbook is downstairs in the kitchen drawer," he said quietly. "Where it's been for 5 years. We stared at each other across the small room, and I realized with crystal clarity that my husband knew exactly what I'd discovered, and that I was in more danger than I'd ever imagined. 2 weeks later, Nathan suggested we attend another family gathering at his parents' house. "To clear the air," he said over breakfast, his tone carefully neutral. "Everyone's been worried about you since the incident." The incident. That's what he called my public humiliation now, as if it had been some unfortunate accident rather than a carefully orchestrated performance. "I don't think I'm up for it," I replied, stirring my coffee without drinking it. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket where I'd kept it every day since discovering their surveillance files. "Claire," Nathan's voice took on that patient tone I'd once found comforting but now recognized as condescending. "You can't hide forever. People are starting to talk." "What people?" "Your sister called yesterday. She's concerned about your stability after the way you reacted to her gift." The lie came so smoothly, I almost believed it myself. Almost forgot that I'd seen the rehearsal footage, heard their plotting voices through his computer speakers. "What did she say?" Nathan leaned forward, his expression shifting to what I now recognized as practiced concern. "She thinks you might be having another episode, like after the miscarriage." The room tilted slightly. "Another episode. The depression, Claire, the way you..." Struggled to distinguish between reality and wishful thinking. I stared at him across our kitchen table. This man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. He was rewriting our history, painting my grief as mental illness, my caution as delusion. "I was grieving," I said quietly. "Of course you were. And now you're pregnant again, and the stress is making you paranoid, finding recording devices that don't exist, accusing people of spying on you." The recording device was real. "Nathan." "Was it?" He tilted his head, his expression maddeningly patient. "Because when I looked in your purse that night, there was nothing there." Of course there wasn't, because he'd put it there in the first place. "Please come tonight," he continued. "For me. For us. My parents miss you, and Melissa feels terrible about how things went last time." I almost laughed at that. Melissa feeling terrible about anything was like expecting rain to fall upward. But as I looked at Nathan's carefully constructed expression of husbandly concern, I realized something important: they needed me to come. Whatever they were planning, whatever final act was meant to complete their narrative, it required me to be there, which meant I held more power than they realized. "Okay," I said finally, "but I want to drive myself." Nathan's smile was brilliant and terrible. "Of course, sweetheart, whatever makes you comfortable." The afternoon passed in careful normalcy. Nathan went back to work, kissing my forehead with what felt like benediction or blessing for the condemned. I cleaned house with mechanical precision. each task a meditation to keep my mind from spiraling into panic. At 6:15, I drove to Nathan's parents' house, the USB drive secure in my jacket pocket along with my phone set to record audio. Whatever happened tonight, I would document it. The house was warmly lit against the early evening darkness, looking exactly like the picture of family harmony it had always been. Nathan's car was already in the driveway, along with Melissa's silver sedan. Dorothy answered the door with her usual gracious smile. "Claire, dear, you look much better. More rested?" "Thank you," I replied, stepping into the familiar foyer with its polished hardwood and family photographs lining the walls. Nathan appeared immediately, as if he'd been waiting just inside. "There she is," he said, pulling me into another of those embraces that felt more like restraint than affection. "Where is everyone?" I asked, noticing the unusual quiet. "Dad's dealing with a work call upstairs," Nathan said. "Mom's in the kitchen. Melissa's here somewhere." He guided me toward the staircase, his hand firm on my lower back. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk privately first, clear the air between us before dinner." Every instinct I had screamed danger, but I let him lead me up the stairs toward the second-floor landing. The house felt different tonight, charged with an electricity that made my skin crawl. "Nathan, maybe we should wait until after." "No," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "We're going to settle this now." We reached the top of the stairs, and I could see into the guest room where Nathan's old trophies and family photos created a shrine to his perfect childhood. But instead of stopping there, he pulled me toward the staircase that led to the third floor, the converted attic space that served as Richard's home office. "What are we doing up here?" I asked. Nathan turned to face me at the top of the narrow staircase, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood freeze. The mask of concern had slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You've been lying to me," he said quietly. "About what?" "About the pregnancy. About everything." I backed up a step, my hand finding the banister. "Nathan, what are you talking about? You've been faking it, haven't you? Just like last time, creating fake pregnancy tests, staging symptoms, playing the victim to get attention. That's not true. Isn't it?" He stepped closer, and I realized with growing horror that we were alone on the third floor, isolated from the rest of the house. "Melissa thinks you're doing it to trap me, to keep me from leaving you." "Leaving me?" Nathan's smile was cruel and beautiful. "Did you really think I didn't know about your instability, your delusions, your desperate need to be the center of attention? I'm pregnant, Nathan. The test was real. The symptoms are real." "Are they?" His hand shot out faster than I could react, connecting with my shoulder and pushing hard. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the top step of the narrow staircase. "Nathan." But as I fell, as my body pitched backward down the wooden stairs, I heard something that would haunt me forever. Laughter. Soft, satisfied, and unmistakably familiar. Melissa stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face upturned toward me with that same terrible smile I'd seen at the family dinner. She wasn't surprised by my fall. She wasn't concerned or frightened. She was delighted. "Oops," she said, her voice bright with mock sympathy as my body hit the hardwood floor. "I guess we'll find out now if you were really pregnant. Won't we?" The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Nathan walking calmly down the stairs, pulling out his phone to call 911, already practicing his performance as the devastated husband whose unstable wife had suffered a tragic accident. I woke up in Riverside General Hospital at 3:47 in the morning, according to the clock on the sterile white wall. The pain hit me before full consciousness did a deep, aching throb in my ribs and a sharper agony in my abdomen that I recognized with devastating clarity. "Mrs. Hartley." A gentle voice drew my attention to the bedside. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair was checking my IV. "How are you feeling?" "The baby," I whispered, though I already knew. Her expression told me everything. "I'm so sorry, honey. Dr. Martinez will be in soon to explain everything, but—" She paused, her professional composure cracking slightly. "The fall caused some internal bleeding. We couldn't save the pregnancy." The words hit me like physical blows, but underneath the grief was something else fury. They had taken everything from me, my trust, my safety, my unborn child, and they would walk away from this believing they'd won. "Mrs. Hartley," the nurse continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been doing this for 32 years, and I need to ask you something." I met her eyes, seeing something there that made my pulse quicken. "You didn't just fall down those stairs, did you?" The question hung in the air between us. I could feel the weight of her suspicion, her professional instinct that something wasn't right about my accident. I started, then stopped. What could I say that my husband had pushed me, that my sister had watched and laughed? Who would believe such a thing without proof? "It's okay," she said quietly. "You don't have to answer now. But if you ever want to talk, my name is Margaret. I'll be here until 7. After she left, I lay in the darkness thinking about proof. The USB drive was still in my jacket pocket if they hadn't taken my clothes. If Nathan hadn't found it during the chaos of the ambulance ride and hospital admission. When Dr. Martinez arrived an hour later, Nathan was with him. My husband looked perfectly disheveled, his hair mussed and his shirt wrinkled, playing the part of the devastated spouse who'd spent the night pacing hospital corridors. "Claire, thank God you're awake," he said, rushing to my bedside with practiced concern. I was so scared. Dr. Martinez, a soft-spoken man I'd seen for my previous pregnancy, delivered the medical details with professional compassion. Miscarriage at approximately 7 weeks, internal bleeding that required minor surgery, bruised ribs and a mild concussion from the fall, full recovery expected within 6 to 8 weeks. "What I don't understand," Dr. Martinez said, consulting his chart, "is the nature of the fall itself. The injury pattern suggests you fell backward downstairs, but the police report indicates you were found at the bottom of a single-story staircase." Nathan stepped in smoothly. "She fell from the 3rd floor down to the 2nd floor landing, the main staircase. She's been having dizzy spells lately, the pregnancy hormones. Stress from work." "Dizzy spells?" Dr. Martinez looked at me with concern. "You didn't mention any symptoms like that during your last visit." I started to respond, to correct Nathan's lie, but caught sight of his expression. There was something cold and warning in his eyes that made me pause. I didn't want to worry anyone," I said finally. After Dr. Martinez left, promising to check on me later, Nathan and I were alone. He sat in the plastic visitor's chair, his hands folded, studying me with those calculating eyes I was learning to fear. "Poor Claire," he said softly. "First the delusions about recording devices, now a tragic accident. People are going to be so concerned about your mental state." "It wasn't an accident, wasn't it?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because that's what everyone saw, a pregnant woman, under stress, having an episode and falling down the stairs. Very sad. Very believable." "You pushed me." "Did I?" Nathan's smile was gentle and terrifying. "Because I remember trying to catch you as you stumbled. Melissa remembers the same thing. So do my parents, who heard the commotion from downstairs. They had their story straight. Of course they did. They'd probably rehearsed this scenario just like they'd practiced the dinner party humiliation. The insurance money will help." Nathan continued conversationally. "The policy on your life has a clause for accidental death, but suicide? Well, that's trickier. Good thing this was clearly an accident." My blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying accidents happen. Claire, especially to people who are mentally unstable, who see things that aren't there, who make wild accusations against their loving families. He reached into his jacket and pulled out my phone, placing it on the bedside table. "Your phone was damaged in the fall, completely wiped. Such a shame you lose all those photos, all those voice memos you thought you were recording." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. They had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. "But here's what I'm curious about," Nathan said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I found something interesting when the paramedics cut away your jacket." He held up a small USB drive, my USB drive, with all the evidence I'd gathered. "Seems like you've been playing amateur detective. Very thorough work, actually. Files, recordings, surveillance footage. Too bad none of it will be admissible anywhere. People will ask questions. Will they?" Nathan stood up, pocketing the drive. "A grieving widow, mentally unstable, collecting conspiracy theories about her loving family, if anything. This just proves how far your delusions had progressed." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Claire Melissa wanted me to tell you how sorry she is about the baby. She's putting together a memorial service. Very touching." After he left, I lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. They had beaten me, taken everything, destroyed the evidence and rewritten the narrative so thoroughly that even I was starting to doubt my own memories. But as I drifted toward an exhausted sleep, I remembered something Nathan didn't know about, something I'd done in those frantic moments after discovering the surveillance files, before he'd come home early. I'd sent copies of everything to an email account he didn't know existed, a backup plan I'd created during my darkest suspicions. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd buried the truth along with my baby. They were wrong. 3 days after my release from the hospital, Melissa's blog post went viral. I discovered it through a Google alert I'd set up for my own name, a precaution I'd learned during my brief career in public relations before switching to accounting. The notification arrived at 9:32 on a Thursday morning while I sat in my living room, surrounded by sympathy flowers and casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors. The post was titled, "When Love Isn't Enough Supporting a Sister Through Mental Health Struggles." I read it twice before the full scope of Melissa's betrayal hit me. She'd written 800 words of beautiful, heartbreaking prose about watching her beloved older sister spiral into delusion and paranoia following a tragic miscarriage. She described my episodes with novelistic detail, the phantom recording devices, the wild accusations, the desperate attempts to stage pregnancies for attention. "Claire has always been dramatic," she wrote. "But after losing the baby last spring, something broke inside her. She started seeing threats everywhere, believing people were watching her, recording her, plotting against her. When she got pregnant again, the stress seemed to trigger a complete break from reality. The comments section was filled with sympathy for Melissa and speculation about my mental state. Someone had already shared it on Facebook. The local news blog had picked it up. By noon, it would be all over Riverside. But it was the final paragraph that made my hands shake with rage. "The doctors say Claire may never fully accept what happened, that she fell down the stairs because she was dizzy and disoriented, not because of some imaginary conspiracy. I just hope that someday she'll get the help she needs and stop trying to hurt the people who love her most." The cruelest part was how believable it all sounded. Melissa had always been the better writer, the more eloquent sister. She knew exactly how to frame the narrative to make herself the long-suffering victim and me the unstable aggressor. I was still staring at the screen when my phone rang. Janet from work. "Claire, honey, I just saw—" "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine," I lied. "That post from your sister. God, I had no idea you were struggling so much. Why didn't you say something?" I closed my eyes. "It's complicated, Janet." "Of course it is. These things always are. But maybe she's right about getting help. Professional help." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my house and felt the walls closing in. This was how it would happen, not with dramatic accusations or police investigations, but with whispered concerns and gentle suggestions that I needed psychiatric intervention. They were rewriting my reality in real time, and everyone I knew was helping them do it. But I wasn't completely powerless. That afternoon, I drove to the library in the next town over, using a computer that couldn't be traced to me to access the email account Nathan didn't know about. The files were all there: surveillance footage, audio recordings, the rehearsal videos, the fake insurance documents. I also did something else I should have done weeks ago. I researched Nathan and Melissa. What I found in public records and archived news articles made my stomach turn. Nathan's first marriage had ended when his wife, Patricia, died in a tragic accident in Denver 4 years before we met, a fall down basement stairs in their home. The insurance payout had been substantial enough to relocate to a small town and start fresh. Patricia had been pregnant at the time, but it was the details buried in the newspaper archives that made my blood run cold. Patricia had been described by friends as increasingly paranoid in the weeks before her death. She'd confided to her sister about finding surveillance equipment and believing her husband was monitoring her. The sister had tried to convince authorities that something was wrong, but ultimately Patricia's death was ruled accidental. The surviving family members had dropped their questions after Melissa Hartley, then Melissa Warner, came forward as a character witness for Nathan, describing Patricia's mental health struggles and desperate attention-seeking behavior. My sister had done this before. I spent the rest of the afternoon in that library, printing articles and building a timeline. Nathan's pattern was clear: marry vulnerable women, isolate them, document their alleged instability, then arrange for convenient accidents. Melissa helped by providing credible testimony about their mental health issues, lending feminine insight to make the gaslighting more believable. I was wife number 2 in this twisted partnership, but Patricia's sister, Amanda, was still alive. Still asking questions, still maintaining a blog about her sister's suspicious death. I sent Amanda an encrypted email from the library computer. "Your sister wasn't crazy," I wrote, "and neither am I. If you're still looking for the truth about what happened to Patricia, I have evidence you need to see." Her response came within an hour. "Meet me tomorrow, Riverside Coffee House, 2 p.m. Come alone and watch your back if you're right about Nathan. You're in more danger than you know." That evening, Nathan came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant and a bouquet of white lilies funeral flowers, though he probably counted on me not noticing the symbolism. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my forehead with what felt like benediction. "Better," I lied. Melissa's blog post was helpful. It made me realize some things. His eyes sharpened with interest. Such as, maybe I have been paranoid. Maybe I need professional help. Nathan's smile was radiant. "I'm so glad you're finally ready to admit that. I've already made some calls. There's an excellent residential facility about an hour from here. Very private, very discreet. You could check in this weekend." A residential facility, where I'd be isolated, medicated, discredited, where another convenient accident could happen far from prying eyes. "That sounds perfect," I said, matching his smile with one of my own. "I think some time away from everything would be exactly what I need." As Nathan busied himself serving dinner, talking excitedly about treatment plans and recovery timelines, I thought about Patricia Warner young, pregnant, and terrified, dying alone at the bottom of a staircase while the man who killed her practiced his grief for the paramedics. But Patricia had died without proof, without allies, without a plan. I wouldn't make the same mistake. Amanda Warner looked exactly like her sister in the old photographs I'd found: sharp green eyes, auburn hair, and the kind of determined jawline that suggested she didn't give up easily. She was waiting at a corner table in Riverside Coffee House when I arrived at 2 p.m., a manila envelope and a digital recorder already positioned in front of her. "You look like hell," she said without preamble as I sat down. "Feel like it too." I glanced around the coffee shop, noting the afternoon crowd of students and remote workers, public enough to be safe, busy enough that our conversation would be lost in the general noise. "Before we start," Amanda said, sliding a small device across the table, "this is a GPS tracker. Keep it on you at all times. If something happens to you, I'll know where to send the police." I pocketed the device, struck by how casually she discussed the possibility of my death. But then, she'd been living with that possibility for 4 years. "Tell me about your sister," I said. Amanda's expression hardened. Patricia was the strongest person I knew. Smart, independent, worked as a nurse at Presbyterian St. Joseph. She wasn't paranoid or delusional, she was observant. And what she observed in the last weeks of her life was her husband systematically destroying her sense of reality. She opened the manila envelope and spread photographs across the table. Crime scene photos from Patricia's death, showing her body at the bottom of basement stairs, medical examiner reports, insurance documents. The official story was that Patricia fell while doing laundry in the basement. But look at this. She pointed to one of the photos. "See the bruising on her shoulder? That's not consistent with a fall downstairs. That's consistent with being pushed." I studied the photographs, my stomach churning as I recognized the familiar pattern of injuries. The medical examiner didn't notice. Oh, he noticed. But by the time he raised questions, Nathan had already established Patricia's mental health narrative. And then this woman came forward. Amanda pulled out a newspaper clipping showing a photo of Melissa at Nathan's side during the funeral. Melissa Warner, Patricia's close friend, who testified about Patricia's increasing paranoia and attention-seeking behavior. Warner. She was using Nathan's last name even before they were married, playing the grieving almost sister-in-law. Very convincing performance. I felt sick. They've been doing this together for years. I think so, but I could never prove it. Until now. Amanda leaned forward. "You said you have evidence." I pulled out a USB drive, not the one Nathan had taken, but a backup I'd made before our confrontation. Surveillance footage of me being pushed, audio recordings of them planning my humiliation, fake medical documents creating a paper trail for my supposed mental illness. Amanda's eyes lit up as she examined the files on her laptop. "This is it. This is what I've been looking for." She looked up at me with something approaching awe. "How did you manage to record all this? They got careless. Nathan's been documenting everything for so long. He didn't think I'd ever find his surveillance system." And Melissa. She couldn't resist gloating. "There's a recording of her laughing while Nathan pushed me down the stairs." Amanda sat back, shaking her head. 4 years. 4 years I've been trying to prove what they did to Patricia, and you've handed me everything I need. What's our next step? We take this to the police. All of it. The evidence from your case, the connections to Patricia's death. Everything. I hesitated. Nathan's already convinced everyone I'm mentally unstable. What if they don't believe me? They'll have to believe the evidence, and you won't be alone this time. Amanda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've been building a file on Nathan for years. Bank records showing suspicious financial activity. Medical records proving Patricia was never treated for mental health issues. Witness statements from Patricia's co-workers who saw the bruises she tried to hide." We spent the next hour going through everything, building a comprehensive case that connected both crimes. Amanda had been thorough in her investigation. She had documents I never could have accessed, witnesses who remembered details the original investigators had dismissed. "There's something else," Amanda said as we prepared to leave. "I hired a private investigator last year to look into Nathan's background. Turns out Melissa isn't his first accomplice." She showed me a photograph of Nathan with another woman, taken outside a courthouse in Nevada. "This is Sarah Martinez. She helped Nathan establish his first wife's mental health narrative before that convenient skiing accident. His first wife. Number 1 of 3. Well, 4 now, counting you." Amanda's expression was grim. "We're not just dealing with one serial killer, Claire. We're dealing with a network." As I drove home, the GPS tracker in my pocket and Amanda's evidence secured in my jacket, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't fighting alone, but Nathan was already waiting when I pulled into my driveway. standing in the doorway with that terrible smile that meant he knew something I didn't. "There you are," he said as I approached the house. I was starting to worry. "Where did you go this afternoon?" "Just errands," I replied carefully. "Errands." His tone was conversational, but his eyes were cold. "In the next town over." My blood chilled. He'd been tracking my movements somehow. "Coffee with an old friend," I amended. "Amanda Warner." The casual way he said her name made my knees weak. He knew. Somehow. He knew exactly what I'd been doing. "I think," Nathan said, stepping aside to let me enter the house. "It's time we had that family meeting I mentioned. Clear the air once and for all." As I walked past him into our living room, I saw Melissa already seated on our couch, that familiar smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Between them, they had me trapped. But they didn't know about the GPS tracker. They didn't know about the evidence Amanda was already taking to the police. And they definitely didn't know that this time. I was ready to fight back. "Sit down." "Claire," Nathan said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false concern. "We need to discuss your activities today." I remained standing, positioning myself near the fireplace where I could grab the poker if needed. "What activities?" Melissa laughed, that tinkling sound that had haunted my nightmares. "Oh, come on. Meeting with Patricia's crazy sister, really? Claire, we thought you were smarter than that." "Amanda's not crazy," I said quietly. "Just like Patricia wasn't crazy. Just like I'm not crazy." Nathan's expression shifted, the mask of concerned husband finally slipping away completely. "You always were too clever for your own good. Just like Patricia." "Did you kill her the same way, push her down the stairs and watch her die?" "Patricia was weak," Melissa interjected. "She actually believed Nathan loved her. At least you had enough sense to be suspicious." Nathan moved closer. His hands relaxed at his sides, but his body language predatory. "The problem is, Claire, you've involved Amanda now. Made this messy when it could have been clean." "You mean my suicide?" "Mental health facility first," Nathan corrected. "A few weeks of intensive treatment, maybe some medication adjustments that don't go quite right. Much more believable than another household accident." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up so they could see the screen. "You might want to reconsider your plans." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "What's that live stream? Everything you've said for the last 5 minutes has been broadcast to a private channel Amanda set up. She's recording every word." Melissa's face went white. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I tilted the phone so they could see the viewer count 47 people watching live, including several usernames I recognized as local police officers Amanda had contacted. "Wave hello to your audience." Nathan lunged forward, grabbing for the phone, but I was ready for him. I'd spent weeks learning his patterns, studying his movements. I dodged sideways, keeping the device out of reach. "Too late," I said. "It's already uploaded to the cloud. Every confession, every admission, every detail of your sick partnership." "You don't understand what you've done," Nathan snarled, his composure completely gone now. "We had everything planned. The facility, the accident, the insurance money. You've ruined everything. Good." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Amanda's GPS tracker had done its job. She'd known exactly when to send help. Melissa made a desperate grab for my phone, her carefully manicured nails scraping across my wrist. "You psychotic bitch, you've destroyed our lives." "No," I said, stepping back as the sirens grew louder. "I've saved them." The front door burst open as officers flooded into our living room, weapons drawn. "Everyone down, hands where we can see them." Nathan and Melissa were on the ground in seconds, their faces pressed against our hardwood floor while officers secured them with zip ties. I stood in the middle of our living room, still holding my phone, watching my husband and sister being arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. "Mrs. Hartley." One of the officers approached me carefully. "Are you injured?" "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. but I have evidence you'll want to see. So 6 months later, I stood outside the courthouse in Denver as reporters shouted questions about the verdict. Nathan had been sentenced to life without parole for Patricia's murder and the attempted murder of 2 wives. Melissa received 25 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. The insurance money Patricia's family had never received was finally awarded to Amanda. Nathan's assets, including our house in Riverside, were liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. I'd moved to Denver to be closer to Amanda, who'd become more than an ally. She'd become family. Real family. The kind that protected each other instead of destroying each other for profit. As I walked away from the courthouse, a reporter caught up to me. "Mrs. Hartley, any final thoughts on the case?" I paused, thinking of Patricia, of the baby I'd lost, of all the women who hadn't survived their husband's greed and manipulation. "Trust your instincts," I said finally. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them, and never let anyone convince you that your reality isn't real. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. "What's next for you?" I smiled, feeling genuine joy for the first time in over a year. Living. Just living. Thank you for listening to Claire's story of survival and justice. If you're hearing this, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about this story. Have you ever had to trust your instincts in a dangerous situation? I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below.